one day at a time.
It's that real this time around. Lock and load.
Get on your knees.
This is the point of no return. I can never go back. Life without parole, upstate, shackled and trapped. Living in the hole, looking at the world through a crack. That I'd rather shoot it out and get clapped. I've gone too far, there ain't no coming back for me. Auschwitz gas chamber full of Zyklon B.
Welcome to Orwellian Optics, the podcast that clarifies modern finance through a macro lens. Brought to you by Alio Capital. We're here to break down how macroeconomics, policy, and political power impact your personal finances and your family's future. Experts agree geopolitics is the biggest risk to your portfolio. We're on a mission to cut through the noise, challenge conventional wisdom of investing, and arm you with the insights you need to stay ahead of the game. Together, let's dissect these critical topics and reclaim control of your freedom and financial future. Welcome, folks, to another episode of Orwellian Optics. I'm your co-host, Chief Executive Officer Joseph Gradante. I'm joined today by our Chief Risk Officer, Tyler Goering, and our Director of Client Satisfaction, Emil Sadofsky. What's up, guys?
Hey, how's it going, fellas? It's good to be back on here.
Yeah, doing good. Excited to talk.
Yeah, we got a lot going on as it relates to the macro climate. This big, beautiful bill, is on the docket, and it made it through the House barely. I think it made it through by one vote, if I'm not mistaken, and I think a Democrat actually had to die to allow that to happen. And one Republican voted present, I believe. I think it was Andy Harris voted present. And another two were no-shows. So this thing barely got through, and now it goes on to the Senate. And the reason why we're talking about this is really going to be a major catalyst for the economy going forward. Because if it doesn't go through, right, it's going to be a downward drag on business activity, right? And that's going to obviously have an effect on capital markets. But if it does go through, right, the extension of the tax cuts, then you have clarity on the fiscal front. Not to mention, the administration's been deregulating all over the place, and that's obviously good for risk on assets. But just to provide some context here, I'm going to start with this video by Mark Wayne Mullen on CNBC. So let's pull it up.
The Senate's getting ready to take on the House passed big, beautiful reconciliation bill, but people are saying there might be a fight ahead within the Republican Party and between the Senate and the House. Joining us now, Republican Senator Mark Wayne Mullen. He's the liaison for the reconciliation bill between the Senate, the House, and the White House. I think of all the different dynamics, Senator, and it's good to have you on. You guys get 6 years. Those poor souls in the House, man. The minute they get in, election season starts for the next 2 years, and that's why it just seems so. Maybe our forefathers were smart. It's really hard to get anything done, isn't it?
Well, that's how our Federalist Papers are wrote. If you read them, they wanted Congress to work slow, so negotiations is part of it. I mean, we're going to bicker back and forth. Both chambers work differently. I have a love-hate relationship with the House because I absolutely loved my time in the House. But, man, it was so frustrating, too, because you're right, Joe. As soon as you finish winning your election, you start running again. So it's kind of always on your mind, especially when you're negotiating one big, beautiful bill that isn't going to be perfect, but it's going to be good.
Exactly. I don't know how many times I've used that expression, the good for the don't sacrifice it, trying to be perfect. But what are your colleagues, the ones that will be in the decision-making process on this? And is it going to be fast? Is it going to be July when it happens? And what are the people that you respect there? It's not everyone's like Rand Paul, I don't think, but there's people like Ron Johnson and others. How much are they going to ask for in terms of additional cuts?
Well, all of us are going to shoot for the moon, right? We want the bill to be as good as possible. But truth is, we've been negotiating this since November. At the end of the day, everybody's idea is going to be considered, but it's your idea. So since it's your idea, as every member knows, it's your job to get the votes for it. So Ron John or Rand Paul or Mike Lee or Lindsey Graham or whoever else you want to put out there, their deal is they have to find 51 votes for their idea. If not, then we've got to move on. So everybody's going to have their fingerprints on it. Everybody's going to be working together. There's just two hard stops that we really can't mess with. And that we can't go below $1.6 trillion in cuts. In fact, Leader Thune says he wants to actually do better than $1.6 trillion. So that's actually more deficit spending cuts than what the House did. And we can't really touch SALT, even though in the Senate we really don't have any SALT members in the Senate on the Republican side. But we also know that's very important to the majority makers in the House. And that was a sticking point, hard point to get over. Other than that, we're going to, as I say, we're not going to tear down the frame of the House bill. We're going to maybe repaint the interior walls and redecorate a few rooms. But overall, the bill and the structure of the bill is going to stay intact. We're just negotiating with them right now. In fact, I was just texting Speaker Johnson before we went on the air here.
In terms of that, you mean you're basically going to do what they want, which is to not touch it significantly enough that it has to go back through a vote in the House?
No, it'll have to go back for a vote because we're going to leave the frame of it together, but we're going to have to. I mean, if we change the bill at all, it's got to go back for a vote. So we're going to amend the bill. We're just going to take our amendments and put on top of it. There was some talk about some people in the Senate that literally wanted to shelf their bill and try to rewrite a different bill. There's no way to do that by July 4th. Leader Thune has made it very clear we want to have this done by July 4th. We will deliver for what he wants to get done. There's going to be a lot of negotiations. I was on the phone with the president this weekend about making sure we're in lockstep with the White House and with the House and with the Senate. But we're going to have to do some amendments. There are some things in this that aren't going to make the bird rule, as I like to say, the bird bath, because it's going through the scrubbing right now. Once it gets done with the bird bath, then it's going to look different anyways. And then we've got to put our own personal touch on it. Every senator, just like every House member, has ideas.
Where's it going to be? Does the Senate want to actually deal more with the abuses that are with the way Medicaid is set up right now? And is that where the problem is in the House? You've got some members that are worried that they might be in more blue areas where the president didn't do quite as well. Will they not be on board with some actual real reform of Medicaid if you do that? Is that where you'd lose them?
No, I mean, you have Susan Collins, who's in a very unique situation in Maine. I say this all the time. She's the only Republican that can carry Maine. I mean, she doesn't vote with us all the time, but she votes with us a heck of a lot more than if we had a Democrat senator up there. And so we've got to give her a little bit of leeway. We have Lisa that's got a little bit of leeway that she's got to work with. Dan Sullivan, Medicaid is a huge issue in Alaska. Josh Hawley in Missouri has made this very clear about him with Medicaid. So
you got the same problems. You got the same problems, and then you go back to the House where you got this. But then we got guys like Chip Roy on the other side. It's tough to watch, and Senator Ron John is a surf shop, so I don't think you can use that for Ron Johnson. But
right, but Medicaid though, there's a lot of confusion that the Democrats have lied about. They went out there, Joe, and said that we're cutting Medicaid benefits. We're not cutting Medicaid benefits.
No one believes them. No one serious believes that.
Senator, how much do you focus on what might be described as the bond vigilantes? This idea that the bond market is a little nervous, maybe a lot nervous, about what this bill may do to the long-run fiscal situation and economic situation in the country longer term. Well,
speculation is what always drives the market. We know this. And in fact, I think the bond market is going to respond well once this bill is passed because it brings certainty, right? It brings certainty to the tax code. It's going to bring certainty that we're going to be getting our fiscal house in order. It brings certainty to some regulatory environments. It understands that we're getting away from the from the big government, less business-friendly environment of the Biden administration and moving to the Trump era administration where it says, hey, United States is open for business again, and we want your business to come back on shore.
But it's not balancing the budget. It's continuing to push out.
If the bond market didn't go to 8% on Biden, it's not going to go up on this, Andrew. No one's freaking out. It's 10 basis points you're talking about as a freak out. That's not a freak out. Go ahead, Senator.
I don't think
IMHO.
Yeah, I don't really think that that what we're going to do here in today's bill is going to balance the budget, but it will tomorrow's bill, meaning that because we're cutting deficit spending, we're going to bring surety back to the market. We already see numbers to the economy extremely impressive. We see inflation down. We're going to see our GDP continue to grow. And eventually, as you guys know, these charts, as we continue to cut, because we'll cut more through discretionary spending too. And so we got, we got mandatory spending cuts. We got discretionary spending cuts that's going to go in. We're going to have GDP growth. And I honestly do feel like we're going to be able to balance a budget for the first time since Clinton was in office. And I think we can do it in about a year and a half.
There you have it, guys. And I think what he said towards the end of that video is really crucial there, right? That this is a pathway to eventually balance the budget. The GDP growth, all interesting, topics when it comes to the macro climate. But first, before I go on, let me hear what you guys have to say after hearing that.
I mean, I think there's a couple kind of competing priorities here. You have some Republicans that are very pro the bill, and then there is the worry that people like Rand Paul, for instance, have brought up that the bill does increase potentially government spending by a lot over the next 10 years. And so the worry that you're talking about the bond market was that something that's going to turn off foreign investment? Will there ever be a scenario where people are worried that America can't meet its obligations and that has an impact on the bond market? The flip side of that argument is kind of what Trump has said is this is a very pro-business environment. We're going to codify these tax cuts. This is going to bring business, jobs, everything back to America, and America is going to be a good place to invest. My personal feelings is that's probably the case. I think that a strong business environment in America is good not only for us, but for the world, and we'll continue to get foreign investment because of that, but curious to hear your guys' thoughts as well.
Yeah, well, on principle, I tend to agree with Rand Paul that, these kinds of ginormous bills, they don't really, Mullen mentioned the Federalist Papers, and as our Congress is designed, these kinds of things don't really work that well. It's why it takes so many months. It's why there is so much uncertainty that it bears out in the markets while we negotiate these various provisions. The government is too large for the structure of Congress that we have and for the checks and balances that are built in there. But as it happens, this is the only way to get things done with the kind of broken legislative system that we have is you put a whole big thing together. So it's got to get passed, and eventually it will carve that pathway for reducing the budget, reducing the overall size of government.
Yeah, I think, the key here is I think, what's not being factored in is, and we're already seeing this in the economy, is the deregulation in a way that's sparking growth. You got to look at the sum total of policy changes. I brought this up before. So when you take into account tariff revenue, how deregulation affects energy prices and just incentivizes risk taking overall, you think of the startup climate, how that impacts AI, all that growth, that's not really factored into the CBO scores, right? And I think there's no other way. I mean, at the end of the day, the big issue for me, when it comes to the GOP is the fact that they don't play together as a team the way that the Democrats do. And that is, and I'm not a member of either political party. I have things I disagree with both political parties, and I want to make that clear. But I think right now, on principle, right, the Trump administration and the argument that the Republicans are making in terms of how to fix our fiscal woes is definitely right, because there's no solution on the other side at all. They want to do more spending, keep our borders open. That's a whole nother can of worms. But just on sticking to what Senator Mullen is referencing there, it is a pathway so that going forward they can do other rescission packages, right, where they go through the discretionary spending line by line and get to a balanced budget, right? It's a pathway there. You can't let perfect be the enemy of good, because the reality is they don't have that type of majority. Right. So you have different factions within the GOP, and it's a bit frustrating, particularly a guy like Rand Paul, who I've always, I love his father, and I agree with him on principle, like Emil's saying, but the grandstanding, I mean, I don't get it, because the alternative is clearly a lot worse, right? This is a pathway to get something done, get growth, get some cuts, and then if you have a good economy, you could potentially keep the majority. But even if they don't keep it in 2026, because it's not, that's just the cycle of politics where the midterms usually swing back to the opposing party. I don't think if the Democrats win, it's going to be by a huge number, but it's just the cycle of things that is the most likely outcome. But when it comes to the next general election, when you look at some of these other things that are happening, the war chest that JD Vance is putting together. So, in terms of right, the army of super PACs that he's going to around him, the money that he's going to have around him, right, and just the way he debates, and the fact that he's so young. His wife is a woman of color. That he, so he's very difficult for the left to kind of box into a corner the way that Trump does. There could be a bright future for the GOP, politically speaking, right, where they have a chance to really solve our country's issues. But if they don't start with this bill, by getting the growth and getting the economy going, they're not going to have that opportunity. So you would think, because the Democrats, all they think about is power, right? They just want power, and they wish for the other side to fail so they can get that power. And I'm just not sure what these different factions are thinking. It's like, hey, let's come together in terms of what's practical, that we could also, because they're going to have to go back to the House, right? The Senate's going to come up with their own version. What can pass the House, with some of these congressmen that are in blue districts? I think that's the bigger issue. Thoughts there, Tyler?
We'll see what kind of changes are made. I'm sure this will look very different from what it does right now when it's all said and done. My personal feeling is I like lower taxes. Love that. I like freer markets. I think if you keep at least those two things at least somewhat intact, that, JD, the GOP, they, if Americans have more money in their wallets, their businesses are doing well, Main Street's doing well, Wall Street's doing well. If all of these things are in place, by the time the next presidential election rolls around, I think he's got a pretty good chance.
100%.
Yeah, I think you sort of hit the nail on the head there, Joseph. I mean, when it comes down to it, this bill is going back to the House. Mullen said it right there. They're gonna fully amend it, and it's gonna keep going back and forth. And if they want political upside, if they want to actually keep winning these elections, so that these changes they can make changes going down the road, they're gonna need to get something done on the economy, and they're gonna actually need to get this across the board. And so, standing on principle for an entire year while this bill gets negotiated back and forth between House and Senate, that's not going to do anybody any favors. And when the Democrats have control, they don't stand on principle. They get in line all together and get something done. And as much as it's I guess useful for certain factions on the Republican side to grandstand, make their points, slow everything down, it doesn't really help. Politics is a team sport.
100%. And that's why it's hard for me to understand. I could see people like maybe Collins, Hawley, and, Johnson maneuvering a little bit, because at the end of the day, these are little things that they're standing on. But, if you listen to Johnson, he's basically like, yeah, I want to extend the tax cuts. I'll raise the debt ceiling for a year, right? And I'm okay on the border, right? On defense spending. It's these other discretionary things that I want to continue to negotiate in the second bill. Okay, so they can get something done. Marshall Blackburn's on board with that. I think they can pull Collins in. But Rand Paul, he's such an enigma, and I want to get to him here in a little bit. We're going to show another video. But I'm just not sure what this guy's end game is, because eventually it's like you got to get something done. And I don't understand why Kentuckians, don't see these charades that he plays. It's very frustrating. But one thing before we get into that, I want to bring up $1 trillion in defense spending. The military industrial complex, no matter who's in power, they seem to always get their due. How do you guys feel about that part of the bill?
That doesn't surprise me at all. I mean,
yeah, no shock.
America has a very long track record of spending a lot on the military. So that's very status quo. I am not shocked whatsoever.
It's just when they bring up these things about, Medicaid, right? It's like, really, maybe we should put this stuff into And they are putting some stuff into infrastructure, but it's, education, maybe, some social programs and to help our homeless. Like, do we really need to keep spending on the military? I mean, I like the idea of the Golden Dome. I'm not sure if that's even in this budget. I don't believe it is. But it just in general, when they talk about all these other costs, it's like, because Ron Johnson, right, and Rand Paul, they're not even bringing up that component. They're not calling out this $1 trillion that's going to the defense budget. And I just that's always curious to me. Like, this is why, I'm an independent, right? Because I just think we should be past this point of, and look, I understand, China is a threat and and they're obviously beefing up their military. I would just like to see where that $1 trillion is going specifically. If you were to follow the money trail, because I'm all about investing in new technologies and missile shields and things like that. But I would just, I'd be curious to see where that actually goes. How do you feel about that, Emil? I know you're pretty down the middle there politically. So what's your thoughts on that $1 trillion?
Well, I mean, there's a strategic resources are important, especially when you are the world police. I was very hopeful during the election season that Donald Trump's administration did take this kind of hard line on Ukraine, and NATO immediately started. I mean, Germany, the UK, some of the larger NATO economies immediately started spending more money on their own defense. So I would have hoped that that would have led to a smaller need for increased spending in the United States. At the same time, this is one of those areas where, security is important. It's paramount to our economic flourishing as well as our safety. And so they can always hide the ball with military spending because it's new tech that we'll never get to see until 10 years after they've developed it, and B, they can't share the kinds of reasons that they need the money. So it's a great way for government to just gobble up taxpayer funds.
Yeah, and I think it leads to, you brought up how it correlates to the economy. That's the other issue there is, right, fiat currency, right? So it's not our currency is not backed by anything. But if we have this dominant military, who's going to challenge our currency, right? And so you heard in that interview the mention of, bond yields going up by 10 bips. But, there isn't an alternative to the dollar at this point. I do think, and this kind of leads into, I think the macro case here, in terms of this portfolio, that's a combination of risk on and risk off assets. But I think, we have to use the military, right? Basically to back our dollar is the point, right? And stay the world's police to really preserve our economic dominance, because then it's a question of who could really challenge us. And I kind of have this, hypothesis, if you will, if not, theory. I can't test it, so technically it's a hypothesis. But that, China's vested interest, when you look at like the fentanyl crisis, or you look at how they try to destabilize the U.S., right? It's all about trying to challenge our currency. And as far as their desire to take Taiwan, I don't think they would do that unless we were destabilized, unless we were in a sovereign debt crisis, because then it would be the question of like, how quickly could we respond and be able to play the world's policeman. So I do think, even though it's kind of, you got to connect the dots there, it is correlated why we have to invest in that military to protect the dollar, preserve our dominance, our hegemony, if you will.
Great point, Joseph. Yeah, I always tell my cryptocurrency fanatic friends who argue with me that fiat currency is worthless and is going down. I mean, there's problems with fiat currency, but it is backed by something. It's backed by guns.
Yeah, 100% there. So I want to show this video of Rand Paul real quick and just kind of, let's put this guy front and center and get him on the record for the sake of the show.
The Senate getting ready to start debating the House-passed reconciliation bill. Our next guest says the math doesn't add up, and he's calling for changes. Joining us right now is Republican Senator Rand Paul of Kentucky. Good morning to you, Senator. We were just talking to the president's son, in fact. What would it take for you to support this bill?
Well, the main thing that I object to is raising the debt ceiling $4 or $5 trillion. That's an indication that we'll borrow that much. It's an indication that we'll put the debt on the back burner. We'll have no more discussion of it for a year or two. And really, we're locked in a year right now where in March of this year, most of the Republicans, not me, voted to continue the Biden spending levels in March. So we're operating under a continuing resolution, which originated as Biden spending levels. You remember Republicans saying, Bidenomics, Biden inflation, Biden this, Biden that. Well, they voted for that in March. So the deficit here at the end of the fiscal year, at the end of September, will be about $2.2 trillion. I'm not for that, so I voted against the spending levels. But now they want me to vote for $5 trillion worth of increase in a debt ceiling, and I'm just not for that. That's not conservative.
So the question is, you know, when you look around the room and you look at your peers and colleagues, how many people do you think you have with you? What does this bill ultimately look like in the end?
You know, I think there are 3 or 4 of us. If there are 4 of us who want it to be more fiscally conservative, I think we can reduce the spending levels and perhaps separate out the debt ceiling as well. But it takes 4 people with courage, and 4 people with courage can make the bill into anything we want it to. Right now, there are competing factions, though. There are 4 or 5 who don't want any spending cuts, and there are 4 or 5 who want more spending cuts. So it's who sticks together better and who has more courage to stand up and say no. I've said no for 6 months now. I said I will not vote to raise the debt ceiling $5 trillion, but I'm pretty much open to compromise on everything else in the bill. I want to make the tax cuts permanent. I supported them in 2017. I think it's the best thing we did for the economy. It's why the economy thrived in the first Trump term until it was shut down by the pandemic. So I do want the tax cuts. I want them to be permanent. I'm for a lot of spending cuts, but I'll compromise and get as much as I can. I'm just not going to take responsibility for the debt. The debt has always been a Democrat problem and a big government problem. Once this bill votes and this debt ceiling goes through, the debt is owned by the GOP, and there is no more campaigning and saying this is the Democrats. It will be owned by the Republicans, and I think that's a huge mistake.
Different question. If you had to cut this budget to effectively make it balance, or at least make yourself feel like it is a fiscally responsible bill, what would you actually cut?
Everywhere. What I've proposed in the past is something called the penny plan, which is a percentage of everything, but it includes all the mandatory spending, all the discretionary spending. And for a long time, 1% cut everywhere would balance. Now it's up to about a 6% cut. So I've offered a budget last year, and I'll offer one again this year that is about 6% of everything. Now, could you do that without cutting people off of Medicare and Social Security? Absolutely. I think there's 6% of inefficiency in both programs, but we did the opposite. In December of last year, Vice President Vance came over and they campaigned and they lobbied to expand Social Security by $100 billion. At that time, I put forward an amendment to gradually raise the age of Social Security. And people say, oh, my goodness, it's the third rail. Do you hate old people? And I say, no, I aspire to be an old person. But the thing is, we have to fix these programs. You will have to gradually raise the age. But I got 3 votes. So people in Congress aren't ready for this. But I've been talking about this publicly across the country and in my state. And people come up and say, well, you're right. It isn't easy, but we will have to raise the age of Medicare and of Social Security. But right now, there is not enough courage in Congress to do that, other than myself and a handful of others.
So I'm going to stop there for now because I am very frustrated listening to this clown. I mean, he does not make any sense. Let me just say that. I mean, on the spending thing, okay, yeah, I get it. But what he fails to recognize is, one, we've had a major population growth, and we've had, a massive, a massive growth in inflation over the past couple of years. But even if you just go aside from those things, I mean, you listen to somebody like Ron Johnson compared to Rand Paul. Ron Johnson's a lot more practical. He talks about going back to pre-pandemic levels of spending. Rand Paul has been playing this violin for 20 years now in government. And he's saying, oh, yeah, people back in Kentucky, they come up to me and say I'm right. Who says you're right? Right? You are, when he's saying that the GOP is going to own this. No, if the GOP doesn't deliver on the economy, they're going to own that. And the Democrats are going to get back in power. And this is a classic example of theatrics playing out in the Senate, because he's in a red state like Kentucky. And so it's clear he doesn't care about the country, right? This is just a narrative, because when he talks about that penny plan, that would never pass the House. I mean, let's talk about the actual system that we have. It wouldn't even pass the Senate. It wouldn't even get more than 10 votes in the Senate. So he's talking about something that is completely not practical. And the entire point of government, the art of government, is the ability to compromise, negotiate. And the fact that he grandstands like this, knowing that this is not a practical path forward, it shows you that he doesn't really care about the republic and doesn't care about the mandate that Trump received. And all he cares about is Rand Paul and Rand Paul's status, because he's relatively safe as a Republican in Kentucky running for re-election at the cost of the party. And if he really cared about the principles that he says that he cares about, he wouldn't want the Democrats to get in power. But he actually does better if the Democrats are in power, right? In a place like Kentucky, because then he can play the boogeyman card and say, hey, look at what they're doing, blah, blah, blah. And, I think it goes back to your point, Emil, that the Democrats never stand on principles. And so now that the Republican, the fact that this guy is going to talk about, his principles at the cost of the party, it just shows you that he's not really practical about starting somewhere, with a potential solution that can, get us where we want to potentially be in a year. I'm not saying they will, right? Because government always goes back on their word. But I think you listen to someone like Mullen and you juxtapose that to somebody like Rand Paul, or you listen to somebody like Josh Hawley or Ron Johnson, you can see real senators versus actors like this guy. And as somebody that really embraces a lot of libertarian principles, I find him to be a big disappointment and feel that, people on the right need to start calling him out, because he's obviously, not trying to get to a solution here. So thoughts on that, Tyler?
I mean, I'd agree with you that the plan of just cutting a percentage from everything is not a good one. It'd be political suicide. I mean, things like Social Security, Medicare, you're going to take less from those things than you would from others, or else your political career is pretty much over with. The one thing that I do agree with him in sentiment on is opposing the debt limit. I mean, I do respect the Paul family and their mistrust of government. I share their mistrust. And basically saying that you can spend up to a certain point. Republicans and Democrats are notorious about spending money. Both of them are bad about that. It's kind of saying, okay, this is your free license to do so. The way I see it is like if you give a toddler in a candy store $10 and say, you can spend up to $10, but you really shouldn't. Do you think the toddler is going to still keep it to $1 or $2, or do you think they're going to go up to 10? I mean, that's kind of the analogy I would use. So I would agree with him in that respect. Do I think his kind of solution of just let's trim off 6% of everything, do I think that's a politically viable solution? No, I do not.
Yeah, those I mean, that penny plan, or just call it 6% everywhere, sort of, it's great for a certain kind of voter because they think, oh, nice and simple, right? But I mean, that doesn't really make any sense. What did he say there, that we can do 6% off of Social Security and not kick anybody off? I mean, we all know that's not really where our Social Security fund is going. It's already underfunded for the aging population demographics that we currently have. And as Tyler said, it's political suicide. He reminds me a little bit of is it Sir William Wallace in Braveheart at the end? It's like, it's really, you yell freedom while you're being executed. Well, that's great. People love that. You can keep getting elected in Kentucky on that. But and I'm all for civil liberties, and I mean, the interest we're going to pay on our debt is insane, and eventually that's going to erode not just into our economy but into our civil liberties. But the way that Paul is presenting things, it's not. Politics is about compromise, especially congressional politics, and calling 6% off of anything is laughable. Nobody's going to agree to that.
Yeah, because Social Security, I mean, there's a bigger issue, because you have the labor force participation rate as well. So as AI, you have all this displacement. We're just starting the fourth leg of this industrial revolution. We don't know where this displacement is going to go. So, Social Security, there's a lot of variables in there that he obviously is not, presenting the entire picture. But I don't want to digress there. I think closing out on that Braveheart analogy is really a perfect way to close the show. But I do just want to mention the macro climate, right? This bill is likely to pass in some watered down version of it, an extension of the tax cuts, likely some defense spending. But the key here is getting clarity on fiscal policy, right? Clarity on fiscal policy that impacts, right, the macro climate, and understanding how that's going to impact your personal finances and your personal portfolios is why we exist as a company, Alio Capital. Tyler, you have any thoughts on that?
No, I thought that was a good summation. The other thing that everybody needs to pay attention to is also the tariff negotiations. I think that's going to be at least a large driver in short-term volatility, especially between China and the United States. So that's another thing to keep an eye on, in addition to the big, beautiful bill and kind of the larger picture.
Yeah, the bill is the key. I think once you get clarity on fiscal policy, that's going to be a boon for markets. And, again, it's the combination of risk on and risk off assets. So the deregulation is likely to spark, growth in crypto and risk taking and new innovation on the AI front. So I think that's going to be a positive for the Russell. And, and then on the other side, the key hedge here, right, is gold, right? And so because they are going to increase to the debt levels. And at some point, this is, they can keep kicking the can down the road, but at some point, the chicken's going to come home to roost, and we're going to have to address this. And more likely than not, you're going to get this good boon in the economy, and then where does that go in 2 or 3 years? And so some people are going to be spooked, and I think to us adding to the national deficit, particularly if rates don't go down. Because what are those interest payments going to look like? And so that's why I think you'll continue to see gold prices maybe initially dip, but in the long run still play out higher. And again, that's the key to having a macro portfolio. So we appreciate you being with us, folks. Again, this has been a podcast of Orwellian Optics by Alio Capital. Check us out on aliocapital.com. Go check out the app, now available in the App Store and Google Play. Peace, love, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks again for joining us, ladies and gentlemen. Be free, think macro, invest smarter by joining the macro revolution with the only investment app powered by Altitude AI. You can join the beta at aliocapital.com. Again, that's aliocapital.com. If you enjoyed the show, please leave a 5-star rating, click like below, and subscribe so you don't miss out on any future episodes. Stay free, and as always, God bless America. This episode has been brought to you by Alio Capital. Get empowered to confidently grow your wealth while strategically managing geopolitical, monetary, and fiscal policy risks. Here at Alio, we combine professional macro investment strategies, personalized portfolio solutions, institutional grade data, and comprehensive wealth tracking into the only AI-powered financial investment app to help you achieve your financial goals independently. Be free, think macro, invest smarter. For more information, download the app now or visit us at aliocapital.com.